Thank you very much for joining the webinar today. My name is Don Bowman. My company is Agilicus, and we make it really, really simple for any user to use any application on any device, on any network without a VPN with single sign-on and multi-factor. And specifically, most of our customers and our focus is around things that aren't desktop and productivity, but are more industrial in nature. So a lot of it is wastewater treatment plants, energy production, manufacturing floors. And one of the common problems that we solve for those folks is how do I get my vendors, my suppliers, my integrators, etc., the safe, secure, and simple access they need to support me effectively while being respectful of the needs of my business and theirs. And that's what I'm going to talk about today, is how to make that simple. So let's do it. So my agenda today is, first I'm going to talk about the motivation. So some of the people on the call, the motivation is very clear. Others, it's a little blurrier. What's happening? I'm going to share my broad perspective from who I talk to. I'm going to talk about what I see as the Industry 4.0 tea leaf trends, where we're heading. I'm going to talk about the roles that we're trying to address here. And there's a thing I call the identity battleground. And this is an imbalance where there's my supplier and myself have a difference of opinion. And then I'm going to talk about what I think your needs are. And you're welcome to correct me on this. Your understanding of your business is much, much better than mine. Feel free to type stuff in the chat if you have a question you want answered. We've got some people from our product team on there that can answer that on the fly, or I'll give it a try. But at the end, I have a call to action, which I think is a set of best practices. And those best practices are non-zero sum. By that, I mean everybody wins. So zero sum means I win, you lose. That's poker, right? But non-zero sum is trade. A bunch of people get together and there's a carpenter, an electrician, and so on. Next thing you know, there's a house. Everybody wins. Everybody gets more money out of that equation. I think there's a thing here where we can do that with security, where we can make it so that the businesses of all parties get more efficient and more secure and easier at the same time. I think too long we've been told you can either have it secure or simple, pick one. It's a false choice. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we achieve that and the way we get there without a VPN, with strict authorization control and reducing costs along the way. So I'm not going to feed you a boatload of stats that you can get from USA Today, but I thought I'd talk a little bit about this case study here. There's a few that I use. One is the Oldsmar water treatment plant in Florida, where a bunch of people got tired of driving out a long distance and decided to jointly install TeamViewer and share a password, and bad things happened. The other one I use a lot is the Colonial Pipeline attack, where one vendor, one VPN, and suddenly there's no gas on the East Coast. This one's a kind of a big deal, right? So at the end of last summer, Clorox had a ransomware attack. It affected 5 of their factories, and it knocked out their production for a long time. In fact, it knocked out 20% of their sales just due to they didn't have product to sell. It cost them $365 million, according to their SEC filing. But there was other impacts as well. So think about supply chain, just-in-time manufacturing. There's a truck arriving this afternoon with the things I'm going to manufacture and ship out tomorrow morning. If I stop producing, those trucks are still in flight. That's why at the very height of COVID, oil went negative in price. They had a bunch of boats on their way to Louisiana, and there was nowhere to store it. And the price of oil suddenly went negative. So supply chain impacts can have a long-term cost here. They might have had to sell off product or lost their slot in their suppliers. The direct remediation costs here, it's not just a couple of IT people working a couple of overtime hours. This is going to have had a wide cast of characters involved, checking out what's happened, imaging it, insurance filling, etc. But beyond that, $365 million. For my business, this would be a lot of money. But brand and company reputation, for my business, if this were me, that would be the end of my company. People wouldn't do business with me if we were prone to cybersecurity attacks. But it could be even worse. In Clorox's business, I can only imagine there's a set of fairly powerful robots doing a fairly set of complex things with a fairly complex set of chemicals. And there's people there. And if you imagine that something has access to this control system, theoretically, there's safety PLCs and limit switches and so on, but it could have been worse. And so this is really why the motivation for cybersecurity is so strong, whether it be about remote access or on-site or any of these things in a manufacturing environment. Industry can't stop. It's expensive to restart. If you're a plastics extruder and all the plastic solidifies in your pipelines, you got to reheat it and clean it. It could be 2 weeks outage. Clorox, it was better part of half a billion dollars. As far as remote support, this could mean a lot of different things, and we're seeing it more as we go. But manufacturing is getting more complex. Gone are the days where it was just hammer and nail and steam engine in the middle. The systems are getting a lot more complex. The numbers of PLCs, the amount of logic in each, the number of sensors. That's because we're trying to get more efficient, more accurate, better production, less errors. Systems are getting more interconnected. The distributed control system is really what industrial control systems are today. Whether you call it SCADA or you don't call it SCADA, it's getting more and more interconnected, but it's also interconnected off-site. You can end up with licensed servers that are internet-based because there's something used as SaaS. Your databases or your historians could be somewhere else. Your big data, which we'll touch on in a minute. And efficiency is even more of a driver than ever. Predictive analytics, mean time to repair. You've got to beat the competitor and get rid of waste. These are the drivers of why a set of specialists are being called upon to provide either full-time, part-time, or a la carte support. And whether support is operations day-to-day or is break-fix, it's super important that the right expert be there at the right time, and it can no longer be one generalist on each site sitting there. It's got to be the specialists involved. One of the other motivations I'm seeing with a lot of people is the SaaSification of what was formerly capital purchases. And you're seeing it in all industries. It's not just manufacturing. Here's John Deere. John Deere's really famous for this. They've gone to war with the American farmer. And they said, you can't buy my tractor unless it's connected to the internet, and you can't repair it. But we saw this with other things as well. CD, I used to buy a CD going to HMV, and now music as a service, streaming. The side effect of this is that more things need outbound or always on internet connectivity than they used to. You can't just buy it, own it for 25 years, bolt it to a wall. It has to also have internet connectivity, which means if the manufacturer isn't supporting it for those 25 years, it's going to have security issues. And that's partly why they've gone to the SaaSification. They want an ongoing revenue stream to keep their engineers busy, effectively, or paid. So we're going to keep seeing more and more of this in Industry 4.0. Big data. Everybody in the world knows or understands differently what big data is, but it's big and it's data. And it's moved from something that you ran as a monthly or quarterly report that was, let's run the batch report for next Monday so the board can see it, to every millisecond I need to have this real-time value because we're doing something with it. Whether it's predictive maintenance, knowing when to change a bearing or something out, whether it's inventory, whether it's anomaly detection, minimizing the use of chemicals. Many remote operations are based around this remote data, and it's streaming out and there's stuff streaming back in, and that's really the opportunity we're talking about today. So I view a set of roles involved here, and there's a shared custody model of what they each do. So the first is the I operate. It's my infrastructure, it's my factory, the buck stops here, the risk is ultimately mine. It's me. I manage it. Okay, well, I'm a person that supports the operator, and I run part or all the systems under some contract. Maybe I'm the one that, runs the chillers and keeps them running an optimal thing, or I send someone out to put toner in the printers, whatever it is. I design, I create blueprints, I specify equipment, I build, I support. The I support people, they're really a la carte. It breaks, I fix it, they call me. And the I manufacture, that's back to the John Deere. If you want to buy it from me, it's going to be connected to me, and that's how it is, my licensed server or the highway. And if you look at that Venn diagram on the right, this is what today's webinar is about, is how do you solve that problem of you have these different people, companies, and they have their own staff. So imagine that you are a plastics extruder, and Siemens is one of your manufacturers, and Siemens makes a chiller, and it chills the plastic the exact right temperature, and everything's great. And Siemens says, okay, in order for you to buy this from me, it's fully always connected to me. It's like my OnStar in my truck, it sends information, but when it needs an oil change, that equivalent to them, do that or you don't have it. And by the way, my staff are going to be able to do something when you need it for you. Okay, great. How many people work for Siemens? Well, 200,000. Oh. How many of them were fired yesterday for cause? Well, it was 100. Oh. Am I going to have a shared account with a single username and password called the Siemens account, and it's well known? How will I ever keep that up to date? Siemens isn't calling me with their HR problems to say, hey, take this user out of your system. You cannot have calibrated users like that. You cannot have local users representing a company. So my proposal in today's presentation is every vendor you work with, whether it's a one-man band with a Gmail account or it's a hyper-global giant like Siemens or Allen Bradley, they have their own identity systems. They know when they fire their staff. They know when they hire their staff. Their identity system you can interface with at a level called authentication. It's a protocol called OpenID Connect, but in a nutshell, it allows them to do single sign-on as if they were signing into their own email. So they can do something on your system in the same way they sign into their own email. And there's a huge benefit to this, which is phishing protection. If users are presented with a lot of different login methods and HTML and stuff and said, don't worry, these are all good, it's easy for me to send them a phishing email and say, hey, just log in the system, do something. When it's always the same, it's easier to train them. Look for the green icon, look for this, look for that. So you want those users, even though they don't work for you, signing in with their very familiar single sign-on and credentials and so on. That doesn't mean you're giving these companies the keys to the door and you're not around, because there's another layer after that called authorization, and you 100% need to own this as the operator. Authorization is the who. The who problem is the first phase. That's the identity. The what problem is what you're allowed to do. That's authorization. You can't outsource that. And that's how the shared custody model works. There's a level of trust and a level of verify. Trust plus verify, to quote Reagan. So coming back to the challenge perspectives, they're not necessarily symmetric across these roles. Everybody wants generally the same outcome. I want my team member to be able to efficiently do their job on that thing over there without a lot of rigmarole. But they vary in how they see that phrased. The person who operates it, they own the risk. Cybersecurity is their top of mind. So they're like, okay, here are the 19 rules and sign off on this, etc., the pointy-haired model. The I manage demographic, these are your vendors and suppliers, they view it the other way around. It's really expensive if every one of my customers is different. They all got their own VPN technologies. I can't install 2 VPNs simultaneously on this laptop. They run a different version than this other person. What am I supposed to do? My team just wants full connectivity all the time. They just want to get their job done. Those are unaligned, right? So they're generally aligned on what they want to get done, but they're specifically unaligned. As a consequence, that idea of identity and connectivity and policy, it's become a battleground rather than a common ground. They're fighting over it because they each have a different understanding, just like that parable of the elephant in the upper right. And it creates acrimonious discussions about backdoors. Hey, let's just put in a little thing with an LTE antenna and we'll hide it in the track and don't tell anybody about it, versus pragmatism. Those backdoors they view as pragmatic. And next thing you know, the old smart water plan is in the news because the water's become poisoned by some bad actor on TeamViewer. So that's the challenge. So this identity battleground, I'm going to talk about this a bunch, and then we're going to talk about the solution. This is part of the solution. If you can get your head around the idea, people work for companies. Companies attest that identity via authentication. That's sign in. You sign in via Azure, I sign in via Google Workplace. We both have taken care of how we manage our staff. It really is a common practice, and I don't think it's a good practice to create shadow identities, contractor one at my company. So, you put in your own identity system, either the company or the person you work with, and you think you've got this solved. You don't need to do that. It's actually much simpler. You can achieve that objective without creating the shadow account that opens you up to that risk of, where'd the password go? That's single sign-on. Single sign-on, whether you call it that or you call it enterprise sign-in or whatever, single credentials, that is super important. If the end user just sees click once, boom, in, second factor, boom, in, and it works the same for every one of their customers and their own email systems and own internal systems, friction is reduced, training is reduced, accuracy is increased, security is increased. So one of the problems we have in industry is there's often local accounts, right? We have a shadow Active Directory inside, or there's a machine over there that we're not really sure what operating system it runs, but all of the original founders of it have passed on and their grandkids no longer want to support it, that sort of thing. This is the problem you need to solve, identity. If you can figure out who people are with their origin identity provider and then provide authorization, everybody wins. So this is how I phrase zero trust. Now, I understand that zero trust is a concept that has a lot of stuff written on it. And some people have very specific ideas of very, very complicated implementations. I'm giving you the 90,000 foot view. You're flying over and you're looking down, right? There's 3 problems to solve and they're independent. There's the who problem. Who are you? For this, each person has that identity. It's singular. I am who I am. You can't change who I am. And they have a way to attest it. For me, it's Google Workplace, don@agilicus.com. By the way, feel free to email me afterwards with questions. But Google Workplace will identify me and authenticate me. Doesn't give me permissions to do anything. The fact that that fact exists in the universe doesn't mean that I can, log into your something and do something. That second problem is called the what problem. So the who problem is who are you? The what problem is what can you do? What are you allowed to do? What roles do you have? What are the rules? How are they enforced? It's called authorization. So Agilicus, what we believe is who is delegated to the origin companies, what is owned by my customer, and they can put very fine-grained rules in. And they can say something like, Don has read-only access to that HMI at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Very, very fine-grained. It's the exact opposite of a VPN, which is, here's an IP address that routes within my network. Please stay where you're supposed to be. This is the exact opposite, very fine-grained authorization. So once you know who someone is, once you've decided what they're allowed to do and you're controlling that, you're policing it, the last part is the how problem, access. How do I get you there? And this is where the other aspect of our system is unique. The connectivity is outbound rather than inbound. That allows you to work behind Starlink, satellite, cellular, things like that don't have public IPs. It means you can work without reconfiguring your firewalls. There's no inbound ports. This is the troika. This is the three tuple that is zero trust. If you have who, what, and how on a per person to resource basis, so not person to building, not person to everything, you have zero trust. There's all kinds of nuances around mutual TLS and encryption and attestation, but this is the very essence of zero trust, is we've switched the model from a shared account for Siemens has a VPN to everything in my building, and there's a trust involved in both parties to, it's a Don at that company to that device. That's zero trust. And it's not that complicated, right? So don't overthink this problem. This is something you could deploy in hours, not days, weeks, months, years. Again, I'm not talking for a tier one bank or a top secret environment. I'm talking for a typical manufacturing floor. There's not a lot of complexity in getting this going. So that shared custody and shared destiny problem. So the operator tends to view the problem as vendor access management. They say, my problem is I got a lot of vendors. I got to make that really simple. The vendor tends to view the problem as, oh my God, yet another VPN and yet another identity. Those jokers probably have their own multi-factor rules. How can I share that across my team? One of the number one questions that I get asked is, how do I share the multi-factor? And it's very difficult to, with a straight face, answer this. So they're looking at, okay, can you please only do multi-factor with SMS? I'm going to use an SMS reflector so everybody gets it all the time. I'm like, well, I think you're misunderstanding the point of this. The point of it is to prove that you are in possession of something, or you know something, or you are something. You need at least two of those. You can't be sharing that. But the vendors view that as, well, I got a bunch of people on staff and they're rotating. I can't possibly manage this any other way. There is a solution. So coming back to those operator challenges, you own the risk. Security is important. Your staff also need remote access sometimes. So it's not just a vendor access, it's my own team. It might be a joint venture, a partnership where you've got a supplier and you're sharing an ERP system to check stuff in and out of finished goods inventory or something like that. It could be a corporate structure where you have a parent corporation and each of the plants is a separate corporation, and there's some shared resources like IT. But you've got things that are shared, and you view it as you own the risk. Security is important. The more complex it gets, you're forced to just trust. You don't like that. Remote support is expensive hourly. You want people to be quick in and out of their job. What are you going to do? The flip side is the people who manage it, they can't deal with everything being different. They don't want clients at all. They don't want your software. They can't. They don't have the licenses for it. You can't say, I use Cisco AnyConnect version 1, 2, 3, and we're issuing a patch. You need to update the patch. They can't do that. So that Avanti VPN issue that just arose last week, or the Fortinet SSL VPN issue that arose last week that CISA warned everybody to get rid of within half an hour, they can't deal with this. So you might be able to, but telling your entire supply chain that they have to change, they can't. the licenses, they can't install on their laptops, can't have two. They might have overlapping IPs with you. You want them to VPN to your plant and use 10/8 and they use 10/8. And hey, the IP, what are they going to do? Change the IP addresses in their building every time? It doesn't work. So how we solve this with Zero Trust. So there's this conceptual model that exists, and I say conceptual because it's one of those things that it probably doesn't really exist except for areas that are spend a lot, is the air gap. The air gap, the idea is outside bad, inside good, outside infinitely untrusted, inside infinitely trusted. If you haven't seen the documentary on the Iran nuclear issues and Stuxnet, it's really fantastic. Iran spent a whole lot of money to make sure that their nuclear spinny things that took all the electrons away and yada yada enriched uranium, those centrifuges, underground, complete, there's an army around, you're going to get shot if you come in there. And foreign actors, presumably Israel and the United States, wrote a little bit of a virus and yada, 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 PLC, something, Siemens, Emerson, and then shake the centrifuges a bit and all blew up. And they were able to get through that air gap. That air gap had a lot more money and physical air in it than yours does. So they really are a little bit of a conceptual model rather than physical. With Zero Trust, what we propose is that person with that identity is brought directly to that one resource with very fine-grained authorization. And it can be as simple as read-only access to the HMI versus read-write. If it's web-based, it can be you can post a new article but can't edit an existing one. It could be an application. It could be a share. There's a lot of diagnostics that some devices produce, and you need to be able to get to the vendor. And it's a big directory full of log files where you need to go plug USB keys in. That's how they got Iran to Stuxnet. You don't want USB keys walking into your plant. And then you want an audit trail. You want to know who did what when. So in this model, any user, any device, any application, no VPN, any network. So the vendor pulls over the side of the road in the truck. They pull their tablet out. There's no client. Click, boom. They're on the HMI. They're on the phone with you. Okay, I'm going to make this adjustment. Are we good with it? Click, done. The way that works is they're challenged to sign in user@vendor.com, their identity provider, just like signing into Office 365. Our system, yours, forces that multi-factor. Hey, can you please prove you are who you say you are? You can either plug in your VPN, your USB key. You could use your biometrics. At least two of I am, I have, I know. Zero Trust. I've got a video on it that I've talked about. And boom, immediately they have access to that one thing. You have an audit trail to prove who did it when. There's a request flow. They can request access, you can grant it, etc. But this is the key, is it brings everything into the web domain. So it works in a browser. It uses the browser sign-in experience and takes it away from the VPN domain of layer 3 routing and routing tables and so on. And that means that vendor has no reason to want to share the account and no reason to want to share the multi-factor. And you have what you need, which is, I know there was multi-factor, I know who the vendor is, and blast radius. Let's say that guy in the truck has a gun to his head. He's being carjacked for some reason. They want to get into your plant. I don't know. And it's going to happen. But now the blast radius is that one thing that you allowed. Okay, so the carjacker, the hypothetical carjacker with the gun who wanted access to your HMI has read-only access to HMI 3, and I have an audit trail for it. Okay, I can get my head around that blast radius. That's part of defense in depth. Defense in depth is bad things are going to happen. So you put rings and rings and rings so you can see it as they progress. You slow them down. You try to think about if that bad thing happens, how far can it get? It's much better than, well, they had a VPN to my plant for 4 weeks. I'm not really sure what they took in and out, but I just know everything's encrypted now. Much worse problem than that. So here, it's conceptually like every resource of yours is on the public internet with a firewall in front of it. And if the user gets into one, they don't get into all of them. Again, user experience, super simple. Browser, all the apps there, click one, boom, it's in front of them. They're good to go. So just to close out this section, there's a lot. I mentioned earlier zero sum. I'm a big fan of non-zero sum equations. I win and you win. I know it sounds like communism. It's not really what it is. But there is a way, it doesn't have to be like dividing a pizza where it's a pie and we each get so much. And if I get more, you get less. We really can both win. So in my case, I win because you buy my product. In your case, you win because your team spends less time managing your vendors and you have less risk and your insurance goes down and your vendors are able to help you more rapidly so you get a better mean time to repair. And your vendors win because they can charge you the same amount of money and spend less time on the back end of it. Their COGS goes down. Everybody wins. The same amount of money flows and everybody wins. So here, quick diagnosis. I want to know what's happening. That audit trail, the user's complaining, I can't get there. Okay, it's faster. All right, I'm on, or now I can see with the HMI with you, boom. The benefit for the team and the vendors, I don't have to worry about 1,000 different VPNs. I don't have any clients to install. My customers all look the same. I sign in with my regular credentials. That customer's easier to support than this one. You want to be the easy to support customer, right? One of my favorite jokes is the bear joke. Two hikers are out hiking. They come upon a bear. One bends over, ties his shoes. The other says, "You can't outrun a bear. I don't need to outrun the bear. I just need to outrun you." If you're the easy to support customer, that's what you want, right? You're the hiker that just needs to outrun the other one. The real world impact is huge. Operational efficiency boosts by getting those domain experts, that complicated system, getting them in there faster, better, cheaper, less errors, more productivity, etc. Everybody wins. So at the end of it all, it's that tailored access, that high granularity permissions. In order for you to get your head around that company is going to have these people which can do these things on this thing that I own the risk for, trust but verify, you're going to want to know how finely can I control what they do? How finely do I know who they are? How finely do I know when they did something? Role-based controls, you want it to be easy to set up. You're going to have one role for support for Siemens. You're not going to have every user have different stuff. So you want dynamic but role-based access control. And that impact on workflows and safety, going back to my earlier thing with Clorox probably really hated saying we lost $365 million due to a ransomware attack. They would have really, really hated if they'd said we lost 365 workers due to an attack. It would have been much worse. So here's my call to action. And again, you're welcome to place any questions in the chat or email the team later. You can always email me, don@agilicus.com. Go to our website, www.agilicus.com. I've got some white papers on this subject. If you look on the resources tab at the top, there's a contact us. You can put something directly on the calendar to meet. And we'd love to help you out with this problem. Or if you think that I've gotten part of it wrong, I'd love to hear from you. If you say, this was great, this wasn't so great. But here's my call to action. So the first thing is users have identity, not companies. There's no need to do shared accounts. It doesn't actually help anything. It doesn't make it simpler. This technology, OpenID Connect, which we implement, means you can have single sign-on all the way through. There's no point. It's just creating work and risk for no reward. The second is identity is singular, not plural. I have a singular identity. I'm not talking about my alter ego that might post on Reddit sometime. I have a singular identity when we're talking about the corporate world. I don't want to have two. I don't want to have another username and password. That's a burden, that's a cost, that's a training issue and a security issue. There's no benefit for that. Let's get rid of that. Number 3 is authentication can be split in half. The identity provider attests to it with authentication, but you can supply multi-factor in the authorization, the who, the what, the how. You can put multi-factor in the what phase, forcing and guaranteeing that all your suppliers are using multi-factor that you can attest to. And multi-factor is lots of different ways to do it. I like YubiKeys. I also like fingerprints. I also like PIN codes, TOTP. I like WebAuthn. I like passkeys. They're all good. As long as the user is presenting something they know, something they have, something they are, at least 2 of those, you've dramatically reduced your blast radius. Here you can do that, and you don't have to worry that one of your suppliers didn't get the memo, or they managed to turn it off, or they do it only when they're on certain networks and not others, or something like that. You control that. Authorization is yours alone. You cannot outsource this. So again, allowing a third-party identity provider to attest a person, it doesn't give them any rights to do something. Authorization is the rights. It's the what. You own that. What can they do? They are allowed read-only access to the HMI. They're allowed access to this PLC, but only if the safety switch is pulled, that kind of thing. Access is per resource, not per network. So this is really the core of zero trust. VPNs are intrinsically what are called layer 3 technologies. They give you it's like a long Ethernet cable. You get an IP address in that remote space, and absent some complex network, what are called ACLs or access control lists, you can kind of do whatever you want. It's sort of, imagine you went to the reception desk of a company and you said, I'm here to meet so-and-so. Company A says, go on back just try to stay out of the secure areas, please. Go on back and find room 52. Company B, the receptionist takes you and takes you back to room B and says, they'll be in here in a minute. Please don't leave the room. And Company C says, okay, we got a room right here off the lobby. I'm going to put you in that one and I'll lock you in there. And when they come, they can walk in with you. Zero trust is the latter. May not seem all that friendly, but trust but verify. And Reagan wasn't that friendly with Russia at that time. So, it is about the verification aspect. But you really need that per resource. You need to have an authorization rule that says Don can read the wiki. Don can print on that printer. Don can have read-only access to that HMI. If you instead just say Don has an IP address, you really don't have that audit trail. You don't know what's going on. You don't have very fine-grained control, and you don't have zero trust. And the last thing is audits need to be fine-grained. You can't have a Don connected to the network yesterday type message. You need to be able to see this IP and where and when and how and who, because really for you to get your head around trusting, you're going to need to have that verification. It's kind of like having security cameras around. They don't really create security other than because they're there, people are on their toes for what they do. So with that, that's my presentation. My suggestion is there's a relatively easy way to solve this remote access need, the underlying constraints of single sign-on and multi-factor. It works for all vendors. Every vendor that you work with has an identity provider, whether they call it Active Directory or Azure AD or Office 365 or Google Workplace or Hotmail or Google or Yahoo or Gmail. They all have them. Okta, they're all great products. Every single one of them has one of these systems in place because they use their own systems. They send email. Putting that in means that part of your problem of user management is removed. If a user leaves their organization, they're going to be taken out immediately. You're going to know all the way through to the user who did what, that trust but verify. Having the what problem in your control, that authorization, being able to express who can do what and police it in the network means that you're able to have the tight control you want. No, I turned them off for the weekend. We were doing some other maintenance or, yes, they came in the request flow, I allowed it, or no, they're always allowed. We have a contract with them. They manage that equipment themselves. You're in control of it. And then the last part, the how, that single encrypted outbound connection, no change to the firewall, nobody moved your cheese. It works the same way it did before. It works for your inspecting firewall if it needs to be Palo Alto, yada, yada, Fortinet, this, that, WAF. But it works the way your IT team needs it. It meets the standards that are there. It increases your security. It decreases your cost. It increases the simplicity for the end user and the vendor. It's non-zero sum, and we'd love to help you out.